The UK is the fastest and most successful decarboniser. There are jobs at stake. The oil and gas that's from the North Sea is produced with lower carbon emissions. It improves our energy security. We get tax revenue to pay for things. Will I be voting for the oil and gas bill next week? Yes.
After the highest temperatures ever recorded in 2023, the unprecedented wildfires, flooding and displacement of people globally, myself and some friends talked about our fears for the future. We discovered that we are with the majority, as 80% of the general public are now concerned about climate change. In our town of Kettering, Northamptonshire, we wondered what we could do. We wanted to find out the facts from the confusing picture in the media. We wanted to know more about what local politicians' views were and what was being done. We wanted to open a respectful and honest dialogue with our MP. In January 2024, local Kettering politicians were invited to discuss their perspectives on climate change. Among the panel members was the Conservative MP for Kettering, Mr Philip Hollobone. The evening centred around questions on the climate crisis and the loss of nature submitted by the 100 attendees. Through this video, we will share Mr Hollobone's views with the people of Kettering and allow his remarks to be addressed by the environmental writer Tom Hardy.
My name is Tom Hardy. I'm a retired academic, writer, environmentalist, one-time education consultant to various government agencies, and a co-founder of MP Watch.
Well, this is probably where we'll disagree on some of the issues. Let's start on some agreement. Do you believe climate change is man-made? Yes. Do you believe that fossil fuels should be phased out? Yes. Do you believe that you can still achieve net zero targets while still using fossil fuels? Yes. Will I be voting for the oil and gas bill next week? Yes. Can the UK meet its carbon targets? Yes.
It's reassuring to hear that Philip believes in the causes and dangers of climate change, and I know he has voiced support for the commitments of COP26. His call to decarbonise future housing stock, improve energy efficiency in new build housing, his promotion of renewable energy generation in his constituency, and his obvious, serious concern over the state of the Amazon rainforest are all commendable. However, actions speak louder than words. I would suggest that there is a contradiction in his assumption that the new oil and gas bill can help us reach our net zero targets, when every respected authority warns that it is incompatible with our legal and moral obligations. The International Energy Agency has categorically stated that if we want a livable planet, then world leaders must not develop new oil, gas or coal beyond existing fields. It is also difficult to reconcile his assurances with his allegiance to the Net Zero Scrutiny Group of MPs, with whom he signed an open letter calling for high carbon industries to face no constraints on their emissions. The Net Zero Scrutiny Group is, of course, an offshoot of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, who are part funded by Gulf Oil, and I would caution that he doesn't ally himself with those who wear their denial of the urgency with pride.
The Conservatives are committed to net zero by 2050. You may not like the 2050 target at the other end of the table, but that's what 90% of the world economy is signed up to. And it was difficult enough to get them to sign up to 2050. So talk of anything earlier is just for the birds.
Net zero by 2050 may be what other countries have signed up to, but as the crisis escalates and ecosystems are collapsing far faster than scientists had assumed, it is now considered far too late, and we should be pushing this message on a global stage. The ever more imminent, catastrophic and irreversible tipping points won't wait. It is also a misunderstanding on the part of the government that it doesn't matter how much we emit as long as we hit the 2050 target on time. As you can see from this chart, it is the speed of the decrease that matters, not the end date. The concave curve is the safer path. The brown convex one is the path that the government has chosen to take. The quantity of CO2 and the damage it will cause with this scenario is unthinkable.
The UK isn't going backwards. The UK is the fastest and most successful decarboniser in the leading world economies.
The UK was doing very well, but we are undoubtedly now in reverse gear. It is impossible to be leaders in a race if we stop running. The government may say that we've cut emissions by 42%, or that we only contribute 1% of global emissions. But these figures don't include our emissions from international flights or shipping, nor do they include the carbon costs of products that we have produced for us in other countries. In reality, our emissions are not reducing. The resignation of 3 undoubted government experts on the subject gives a picture of exasperation. When he resigned as Energy Minister, Chris Skidmore said, "I can no longer condone nor continue to support a government that is committed to a course of action that I know is wrong and will cause future harm." And when he left government, Environment Minister Zach Goldsmith said that the UK had, and again I quote, "visibly stepped off the world stage and withdrawn our leadership on climate and nature." And Lord Deben said in his last report for the Committee on Climate Change, the government's independent advisory body, "Our confidence in the achievement of the UK's 2030 target and the 5th and 6th carbon budgets has markedly declined from last year."
That the UK produces a massive 1% of the world's carbon emissions. China produces 30%. In the last 7 years, China has emitted more carbon than the UK has emitted since the Industrial Revolution of the 1780s.
Regarding China, if we look at emissions per capita, which is the only equitable way of comparing countries of different sizes, China's are roughly the same as the rest of the developed world, having achieved record falls in emissions over the last few years. It's also worth noting that China's emissions are half those of the USA. And if we look at emissions since the Industrial Revolution, the UK's historic emissions are 5.5 times more than China's. China generates more energy through renewables than the UK, with 6.3% of their total energy supply through wind, solar and hydro, compared to 4.4% in the UK. And last year, China installed more solar panels than the USA has done in its entire history. They're expected to reach peak emissions this year due to their turbocharged renewables rollout. So rather than criticising, we should look to their example as a world leader and how investing in new technologies is an investment in a cleaner, healthier, prosperous society.
And we've got to remember that there are jobs at stake in the UK.
PricewaterhouseCoopers' research paper on jobs in the energy transition has concluded that by 2030, 270,000 skilled workers from the fossil fuel sectors will likely be out of work as Philip says, the oil and gas runs out. At the same time, 400,000 jobs will be needed in low-carbon energy sectors.
The fact is that Britain's oil and gas production from the North Sea is declining by 7% every year. Allowing these new fields to come on stream doesn't override that. We still produce less.
This is an odd argument. Producing less still means producing more than we need, and more than is safe. A clear message from the International Energy Agency is that to reach net zero by 2050, no new fossil fuel projects are needed. There's more than enough being produced in current oil and gas fields to see us through a transition without granting new licenses.
The oil and gas that's produced from the North Sea in UK waters is produced with lower carbon emissions than the oil and gas that would otherwise have to be imported.
The government often talks of low production emissions, but these emissions are a distraction. It's the emissions when fossil fuels are burned that are the problem. And the argument that there will be lower emissions because we won't be importing as much falls down when you account for the emissions of exporting it. It doesn't matter which direction the fuel is moving.
It also improves our energy security, and we also get tax revenue to pay for things like the £500 million new hospital we're going to get down the road.
To improve energy security, the UK government must act to reduce its reliance on fossil fuels, rather than incentivising further development of fuels which will be sold on the open market and will not affect the price that we pay. By following the examples of countries who have achieved near 100% renewable energy generation, countries like Costa Rica and Uruguay, consumers will become less exposed to the volatility of global oil and gas markets and associated price spikes. Renewables are at present 9 times cheaper than fossil fuel generated energy, and getting cheaper all the time, while oil and gas stocks become more expensive as they dwindle. Increasing investment in renewable energy sources through more effective taxation of the oil and gas industry, who at the moment get more back from the government through tax breaks and subsidies than we get in return, will continue to help reduce costs to consumers and improve longer-term energy security. The former COP26 president, Alok Sharma, explained, "The government has said the offshore licensing bill is about protecting energy security, but the reality is the oil and gas extracted from the North Sea is owned by private companies. The government doesn't get to control who they sell it to." Under the pathway to net zero emissions recommended by the UK Climate Change Committee, the cost of this transition is estimated at less than 1% of GDP over 30 years, an investment that would pay for itself in savings on fuel alone, and is expected to boost GDP and employment in forward-looking technologies. Meanwhile, climate-related damage is currently costing the UK 1.1% of GDP and is expected to increase substantially. The Office of Budgetary Responsibility has clearly stated that, quote, "The costs of failing to get climate change under control would be much larger than those of bringing emissions down to net zero." In propping up a deteriorating fossil fuel market, Number 10 is making the country highly vulnerable to future revenue stranding.
And that's why the trade unions are opposed to the Labour Party on this issue, because they know that there are real livelihoods at stake.
This is a very out-of-date assumption. Workers and unions in the energy sector have themselves called for pathways out of these high-carbon jobs, which they now recognise are a dying industry. And of course their skills are highly transferable to adjacent energy sectors. The GMB, the largest energy sector union, and its sister unions published a pamphlet titled "Demanding a Just Transition for Energy Workers." Quote, "The GMB wants to see a world where we get most of our energy from renewable sources, not fossil fuels. We believe that the lack of a just transition in previous decades has left too many workers and communities on the scrap heap. Promises of green jobs have failed to materialise because the government has failed to promote domestic low-carbon manufacturing and secure domestic supply chains for the wind industry." In a nutshell, new fossil fuel extraction in the North Sea will emit the equivalent of 14 million petrol-driven cars. The move will drive a coach and horses through our climate commitments and blow the UK's carbon budget out of the water. Burning the oil of Rosebank, the largest field, would produce over 200 million tonnes of CO2. Thanks to the government's oil and gas subsidies, UK taxpayers will carry almost all of the costs of developing Rosebank, handing over roughly $3 billion in tax breaks to its Norwegian owners, who will then sell the oil on in the open market with very little advantage to the UK. And to add insult to injury, the UK taxpayer will pay for 40% of eventual decommissioning. This burden would seem at odds with the government's pledge on a lower tax society. And the knock-on, of course, is that the awarding of fossil fuel licences will undermine the confidence of investors in renewable alternatives and reduce our global competitiveness in the new sustainable industries.
We invited Philip Hollobone to respond to the points raised in this video. Mr Hollobone initially responded to say that he thought it was unfair for MP Watch to address just his answers. In response, we have replied to Mr Hollobone to explain that MP Watch will always focus on the views of our elected representative in Parliament, whoever that may be. We have again asked Mr Hollobone to specifically address any of the points raised by Mr Hardy in the video, especially if he believes that there were any factual errors, as it is our aim to be completely fact-based, impartial and equitable. At the time of publication, we have not heard anything back regarding the points raised in the video. We respect that there could be many reasons for this, and we remain open to future dialogue. So, what can you do? Firstly, consider sending an email to Mr Hollobone. His email is below, expressing your concerns about his views on climate change and urging him to support evidence-based environmental policies. Secondly, you could book an appointment to speak with him directly at one of his constituency surgeries, where you can discuss the importance of acknowledging and acting on climate change in person. Finally, you can join the Kettering MP Watch group and be part of a community that actively monitors and responds to local political stances on environmental issues. Together, these actions can help make your voice heard and contribute to fostering positive change in our community's approach to climate change. We encourage our viewers to share their thoughts and continue a respectful conversation in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more videos like this.